Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art on Monday, December 11th, 2023. I'm Doug Shear, ATOA President. Next month marks the start of our 50th year of the Forum. Since 1974, we have presented over 8,500 artists, curators, museum and gallery staff, art writers, and academics in more than 1,000 recorded talks. Our archive resides at Archives of American Art of the Smithsonian. A major art auction and celebration are planned for May of 2024. Watch our website or look for other announcements coming from us very soon. Tonight's event and its recording are copyrighted by Artist Talk on Art and will be available on our YouTube channel within just a few days. Our next event on Monday the 18th will be focused on artists as curators and moderated by Mitch Pilnick. Tonight's event explores how women artists changed everything.
It's a small topic.
And features a book called Mothers of Invention, The Feminist Roots of Contemporary Art. I should mention that both Eleanor Heartney and Nancy Princenthal have appeared previously with Artist Talk on Art in the past. And now a few things about Eleanor Heartney. Eleanor Heartney has been writing about art since 1981. She's a contributing editor to Art Press, editor at large for the Brooklyn Rail, former contributing editor to Art in America, and has written extensively on contemporary art issues for such other magazines as Art News, Art Net, Art and Auction, The Washington Post, and the New York Times. Heartney was the 1992 recipient of the College Art Association's Frank Jewett Mather Award for distinction in art criticism, and has also received grants from the New York Foundation for the Arts and the Asian Cultural Council. Her books include Critical Condition, American Culture at the Crossroads, Postmodernism, Postmodern Heretics, The Catholic Imagination in Contemporary Art, Defending Complexity, and Art and Today. She is a co-author, along with Nancy Princenthal, Helaine Posner, and Sue Scott, of After the Revolution, Women Who Transformed Contemporary Art, The Reckoning, Women Artists in the New Millennium, and the forthcoming Mothers of Invention, The Feminist Roots of Contemporary Art. Heartney is a past president of AICA USA, the American section of the International Art Critics Association. And in 2008, she was honored by the French government as a Chevalier dans l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. And now, Eleanor Heartney.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Artist Talk on Art. It's great to be back here again. So I'm going to now introduce my partner in crime, Nancy Princenthal, because we really are kind of equals in terms of this project. She has, as well as the kind of ongoing project that we're going to talk about today. This is now the third book that we are publishing about women artists. Has also written a number of other very important books, and of course many monographs, written for many magazines. I'll just mention a few of her books. On Unspeakable Acts, Women, Art, and Social Violence in the 1970s, which was named one of the best art books of the year by the New York Times and one of the best of the decade by Art News. Her book, Agnes Martin, Her Life and Art, received the 2016 Penn Jacqueline Bogard Weld Award for biography. She's also written a book on Hannah Wilke and numerous monographs, Catherine Bradford, Doris Salcedo, Robert Mango, Willie Cole, Gary Simmons, Leslie Dill, Alfredo Jar, and many others. And of course, written for many magazines. And she is currently working on a biography of Louise Bourgeois, as well as this project that we have together. So I thought that what we'd start by doing is to talk about the kind of larger project that we've been involved in. And so I'm going to start now. I'm going to hope that let's see now. Why is this doing this? I'm going to hope that my screen sharing skills are going to be working here. And so I am now going to attempt to share my screen, and let's see what happens here. And I think we have shared the screen. Yay. Okay. So you all see the screen. Okay. So our title today is How Women Changed Everything. And in a way that's been kind of, I guess, the theme behind all three of the books that we've been involved in. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the nature of our collaboration. But I wanted to begin first with just a quick little talk about the books that we have done and how they connect to each other. So this all came about, I mean, we all knew each other, but I guess it's been about 20 years ago. I think it was Sue Scott, actually, who was the one that, I know she's the one that recruited me with this idea of writing a book about women artists. And we ended up having this little quartet, the four of us, Nancy, me, Sue, and Helaine Posner, you see here. And the first book, we wanted to address the question that Linda Nochlin had asked in 1971, why have there been no great women artists? And of course, answering it with, well, of course, there have been great women artists. And so this book involved 12 kind of very important, interesting, generative artists, ranging from Louise Bourgeois to Dana Schutz, covering, a whole mix of mediums and different points of view. And with this, in this book, 12, we focused on 12 artists. So it was really, there wasn't so much of a thematic organization as, kind of focusing with sort of extensive essays on these 12 artists. Then after that book had come out, we had so much fun that we thought, well, we have to keep this going. We had asked Linda Nochlin to do the introduction to the book. And she said in her introduction, she said, after the revolution comes the reckoning. So when we were trying to figure out what to call the new book, we thought, aha, the reckoning. So this second book, The Reckoning, was focusing on younger women artists, artists who were born from 1960 and later, a different generation. And we decided in this one to have shorter essays and to arrange them thematically. And the themes that we came up with for this book were Bad Girls, which was basically about the challenge to the male gaze, Spellbound, which was surrealist-inspired private dimension of art. Domestic Disturbances was really about the idea of home as both refuge and prison, and History Lessons, which looked at feminism and politics. One of the things we did in both books that seemed very important to us was to include a section of statistics, because when we were thinking about the whole question about women artists, there were, we had this vague sense that, of course, things were much better now. Things have gotten much better over time than they were back in, say, the bad old 60s and 70s. So we compiled a number of statistics looking at kind of major museum shows, monographs, different markers. And one of the things that we discovered, which was kind of shocking to us, was that the women, things did get better and better and better up to a certain point. From women artists being maybe, 5%, 10% or whatever. But when it got to about 25%, it leveled off. And it's kind of stayed around there between 25 and 30% for all of these markers, throughout, even up to today. I think, again, I feel like we didn't do statistics in the new book, but I feel like maybe it's better now, a little bit better. But when you look at the statistics, it's kind of shocking. So after doing The Reckoning, again, we thought, well, we need to do another book. What are we going to do? And then COVID came. And one of the things we did in COVID, we decided that every week we would meet, not necessarily to talk about a book, but just to kind of keep ourselves sane. But out of those weekly meetings on Zoom came the third book here, which is the one which is forthcoming in March called Mothers of Invention, The Feminist Roots of Contemporary Art. And I'm going to let Nancy talk about this book. So I'm going to, let's see, I have to stop sharing and, or no, I can keep this up, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Eleanor. I wasn't expecting to jump in so soon, but I'm happy to do it. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks everyone for showing up, all of you who are out there and Artist Talk on Artland. So yeah, it's wonderful to hear your perspective on how we got to this book. My memory is less organized, and it reaches back further to, I feel like we were talking about this book when Trump was elected. I feel that, I mean, of course it came together under COVID, but I also feel that the Me Too movement, which, of course, arose partly in response to life under Trump, the Women's March on the day after his inauguration was a big part of what made us, what galvanized us for this book, Mothers of Invention. And, there's none of the 4 themes. So this is a book that's organized around 4 themes. None of them is explicitly about, the politics of the moment, but I think politics, certainly gender politics, feminism, weaves through all of them. So after going through a tremendous number of ways of thinking about the art that we wanted to talk about, we came up with these with this quartet of ideas. The first chapter is on, or the first chunk of the book is on performance, and that is the chapter that Helaine has undertaken. The second is my chapter, which is on craft adjacent, craft related art. It's called Handmade. The third is on abstraction, and you'll see when we get into talking about the work that's actually in the book, the artists that will be and that we've written about, that there are a lot of overlaps among them. And the last is Eleanor's chapter on ecofeminism. And we also decided to organize it around the idea, since the book is called Mothers of Invention, that there are sort of key figures with whom we introduce each of these sections. So it's I have to look at my cheat sheet now. It's performance is Marina Abramovich. For craft, it's Lenore Tawney. It's Pat Steer for abstraction, and Eleanor, yours is Meryl Euclides for ecofeminism. And there are a number of things that kind of go across all 4 of these categories, and we'll be talking about that, I think, a little bit later. But briefly, what they are, I think, are a sense of physicality, of touch, of the handmade, that actually does go across all 4 categories. This is not mostly a book about digital work. Collaborative works, a sense of sociality, of working together as a subject and also as a process, materiality. And I think throughout all 4 of these, including abstraction, including the more sort of traditional art disciplines, a kind of resistance to the market as it is, certainly a resistance to digital technology. It's funny that came up so early in the discussion. And so the last, sort of bit of organization is that with these mothers, in quotes, scare quotes, introducing each theme, we also reached back historically, roughly to the 1970s, which, as it happens, is where each of us sort of came into the art world, the late 1970s, but it was a pivotal moment in feminism also. And not to say that we don't go back further, but that is essentially, those are the points of organization for this current book, Mothers of Invention.
Right. And one of the things I think also that was important to us, in a way, we felt like we were kind of redoing a history, dealing with these mothers, because one of the things that was important to us to talk about was the way in which women artists and their ideas, their initiatives, really are at the core of, many of the kind of most pervasive things that are happening right now in contemporary art. So we, in each of our chapters, that's the way we organized it differently than the other books, which were more artist focused. And these are, of course, they're all about artists, but that we trace these themes through history, and we come up to the present. So we also wanted to look back, but we also wanted to look ahead and even forward. And another thing that was different in this book than the other books was that we included some male artists, because part of the idea here too is that, well, first of all, we want to see how these feminist ideas, have taken root and have flowered, but also, of course, there are male feminists. And so we also then had to kind of think a lot about what do we mean by feminism, if it's not just about, kind of pursuing a totally female, vision of the world. And especially today, it seems that seems to be a sort of a narrow vision.
Something locked up here.
Pardon? What happened? What did we lose something here?
About 15 or 20 seconds ago, I think, yeah.
Oh, okay. So our wait, now what happened to my, I'm not even sure what happened. This is bad. Where are we? Okay, wait. I'm not sure why did it, oh, I know why it disappeared, because that was the next slide. Okay, so anyway, what I want to do now is go back. So that's sort of our project. That's the kind of core of the thing. And so what we thought we'd do now is to talk, each of us will talk a bit about our particular themes, which I think will also give you an idea of sort of the approach that we're taking in this book. And then we'll go into some sort of more general questions after that. So Nancy, do you want to, I think I've stopped sharing my screen. If you want to talk about handmade.
Oh, sure. Okay, so let's see how I do with screen sharing. Share.
Ah, good.
Yeah. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Unobstructedly. Okay. So as I said just a minute ago, each chapter introduced by someone we consider sort of representative of where we're starting in terms of describing lines of influence, chains of influence. And, this is a picture of Lenore Tawney in her studio at Coenty Slip, downtown community, in 1959. And Lenore Tawney was, of course, a leader in the fiber arts movement of the 1960s. And one of the points that I wanted to make about handmade art craft is that the relationship between art and craft, sort of like the relationship between men and women, is not a binary. There's a spectrum, with a series of, constantly shifting movable points on that spectrum. And Lenore Tawney can be seen to be representative of somebody who helped move those points around, who help complicate the relationship between what's considered decorative or in a different discipline from the fine arts and craft. And I actually jumped back in my discussion of this subject to the Bauhaus and beyond. This is Annie Albers. One of the things I learned about when I was researching this book from a wonderful book about mostly about clay, actually, by Jenny Sorkin, is that at the Bauhaus, Gropius was very disturbed to find that there were so many women in his school, and that a lot of them wanted to, take the courses that he had envisioned being men's courses, architecture, and the courses that led up to architecture, woodworking, metalwork, and so on. And so he actually restricted women from taking those courses and confined them to to weaving, textiles, and I think bookbinding. And so, Annie Alper is made a virtue of necessity. She helped the fiber arts flourish throughout her career. Another of the artists that revolutionized the relationship between textile arts and the rest of the art world is Magdalena Abakanowicz, a Polish artist who sorry, I had a Sheila Hicks in here. It comes later. Okay. Who, at the time that Abakanowicz embarked on her career in Poland under communism, the useful arts were promoted, especially for women. And, so she again made a virtue of the necessity, or at least the opportunity that arose for her to do textile arts by undertaking this incredibly radical hybrid of garments, installation, habitation. There was a fantastic show of this work at the Tate last summer and fall, and the scale of these things and the ambition, the monumentality, which is of course associated with men.
We lost a little bit of the voice.
Oh, okay. Is there something I can do to make it come back? Can you hear me now?
I'm not having any problem.
Okay.
I can hear fine.
I'll just
I
keep-
can hear fine too.
I'm thinking, because my cat has just entered my Zoom room, all bets are off. So I'm going to hope for the best here. So Magdalena Abakanowicz is, in a sense, a little bit, the work stretches back to the 60s, a little bit before our timeline, but an important precursor to a lot of the work that followed. There are some, general things I wanted to say about my subject matter, apart from craft existing on a spectrum, just as gender does. And this is also something that Jenny Sorkin brings up in her book. A lot of the energy behind craft, particularly in ceramics works, is performative in a sense. There's with work that is driven by the demands, by the constraints of the medium and the process, with art that submits in some way to what the material wants. There's an element of the performative. There's also a history of the performative in terms of craft demonstrations of that, bleeds into pedagogy and also into the therapeutic uses of craft, which has a long history going back at least to the early 20th century. And finally, there's also, and these are all things that sort of stretch across our 4 chapters, there's a relationship to activism in everything from suffragettes' banners to the AIDS quilt to pink pussy hats that we women wore coming together after Trump's only.
Let's hope only.
All right, first and last. So here's Sheila Hicks, another pioneer of fiber arts. This is a work from the late 1960s. And one of the other things that was important to this body of work for me was the internationalism of the influences that come into it. Sheila Hicks now divides her time between, and has for a long time, between New York and Paris. And along the way, she set up workshops in Chile and Mexico, South Africa, while developing commercial woven fabrics in India and tufted rugs in Morocco. And you can see the influence of all of those cultural traditions coming into her work. Faith Ringgold began making story quilts in the early 1980s, and many of them are these funny and sort of heartbreaking stories of daily life in Harlem, where she was a longtime resident, and also pretty searing allegories of America's racial history. But this particular image is one of a series of images that she's made, quilt based, that take a more forgiving, a funny perspective on the relationship between European modernism and other traditions. This is called Sunflower Quilting Bee at Arles from 1991. And it inserts these 8 Black racial justice heroines, including Sojourner Truth, Ida Wells, Rosa Parks, into a scene where you can see Van Gogh rather humbly holding up a bouquet of flowers for these women who are making this wonderful sunflower quilt. Joyce Scott actually began her career as a quilter as well. Her mother was an important influence and a quilt maker who made appliqué and embroidered quilts that Joyce Scott describes as picture books made of cloth. But what Joyce Scott is best known for is this beadwork, which she's done throughout her mature career, some of which is a lot of which is a compound of sculpture and jewelry, a hybrid that's really, she's made entirely her own. But there are also a great number of sculptures, as is true of this one, that take on this very pointed, if you'll excuse the pun, reflection on violence and race. One of the landmark exhibitions of craft-related work that took place over the past almost 30 years now is Marcia Tucker's A Labor of Love from 1996, and that is where Liza Lu's kitchen installation was first shown. This is an installation that took Liza Lu 5 years to make, 1991 to 96. And just absolutely maniacally labor-intensive labor of love that replicates an all-American kitchen in glass beads. Marcia Tucker wrote in the catalog essay, "Many of the skills employed to make handcrafted or highly detailed or labor-intensive and time-consuming pieces in a labor of love have traditionally been considered women's work." So, that was one of our foundational ideas for this section of the book. Because they were made within the domestic, I'm quoting Marcia Tucker again, because they were made within the domestic rather than the public sphere, were done for love rather than money, or were simply done by women, these handicrafts were ipso facto considered inferior to fine art. But Marcia's concerns weren't only with gender, and here again, she was really ahead of the curve. She condemned what she called great white hunter attitudes evident in some forms for which she put in scare quotes, outsider or folk artists, where such makers are presumed childlike and unable to speak for themselves. And she also called out this, sort of troubling paradox that many of the people who celebrate traditional crafts and folkways have been the neoconservatives in our cultural landscape, even white supremacists who lumped folk artists and craftspeople with anything that is that can be diminished. So I think what has happened in more recent years is that artists have turned academic, commercial, and folk traditions on their heads, incorporating sophisticated kinds of decorative art into a sort of undermining of the conventions that they represent. This is Kathy Butterly from 2004, a sort of send up of fine chinaware with this beaded, banded, thin-lipped, and often sort of very elusively figurative wasp-waisted ceramics, highly glazed often ravishing, but slumped, kind of elegant send-ups. This is a recent work by Lisa Dorigo, who also, I think, does a good job of finding the metaphorical applications to some of the standard descriptions of ceramic things being built up, or some of the, you know, standard procedures. Things are built up, bent, propped, fired, glazed, slumped. So there's obviously a sort of incipient figure taking shape here. It is certainly slumped. And I think there's often a lot of body language that is recognizably personal, human, funny in Elise's work. This is a recent bust by Elise Siegel, whose show at Stephen Harvey just closed on Saturday. Wonderful show. Elise updates the tradition of classical busts, endowing them with a psychological and also a stylistic complexity that complicates this lineage, this, you know, very venerable lineage of human busts. Bringing them into our time. Eleanor Heartney, whose wall hangings, this is Forget Me Not. No, this is not Forget Me Not. This is a different wall hanging, but a recent one. And Ilana is someone who very deliberately brings the sort of global trade that is represented by textiles and the traditions that are carried along with that trade into these very complicatedly interwoven and layered textile hangings. Oh, here we go. There's Forget Me Not. This is a slide showing a performative work by Neen Humphrey. One of the things that I've already spoken of and that we looked at, each of us looked at in one way or another, is women who are working collectively. And in this project and subsequent ones, Neen has brought numbers of women in various contexts into her process. What is going on here is women undertaking a version of a kind of braiding of, in this case, copper wire, metal wire, that reflects a ritual form of mourning in the Victorian era. Well, women would get together and weave, often using actual human hair, to form these braids and jewelry as a form of thinking through grief. Also, so I guess I'm going to have to say, here's our token guy for this part of the talk. But Theaster Gates is too important in this domain of bringing community together around the production and distribution of craft processes. To not have a slide up, this is his Soul Manufacturing Corporation, which is a project he's undertaken in several cities, collaborating with local arts organizations and their members to set up facilities that produce unusable ceramic objects. This is Sheila Pepe and Carrie Moyer's collaboration for an exhibition at the Portland Museum in Maine. It's called Tabernacle for Trying Times. And so Sheila's crocheted hangings form this sort of materialization of a kind of social network, a kind of web. Carrie's paintings are visible sort of through that screen in the background, and they intended, say, the show opened just as COVID descended, so a lot of the convening that was meant to happen live happened digitally for this show. But the show was meant to create a space of social congregation, of communing, and also of encouraging people to just spend some time and reflect in this very complicated painterly sculptural environment. Anne Hamilton is our cover girl for this book, and this is an installation similar to the one she did at the Armory that we saw earlier as the cover image. This is Habitus from an exhibition, and also this installation she did at the Fabric Workshop in 2016. And these enormous swirling sheets could be manipulated by viewers. If you yank on the sheets, on these cords that go from the top, from the ceiling of this pier to the ground, you can set these spinning ghost-like figures in motion. One thing about Anne Hamilton's work, which often involves community engagement and always reflects on social and political conditions, is that, and this is a quote, "My first hand was a sewing hand," she says about her work, "a line of thread drawn up and down through cloth influences how I think about the confluence and rhythms of space and time." So it's a very poetic statement of something that actually has powerful material presence as well in her work. In conclusion, I just want to say a couple of things about the language of craft. Two bywords of our time are artisanal, which is a word derived from craft. And as we know, it appears everywhere. You can have artisanal beer, you can have artisanal cupcakes, and curate, a term which was born in religion and borrowed with spiritual authority intact by art. And, those two terms frame the whole discussion, I think, of craft adjacent or handmade work. And they do get into a complicated dynamic with the way such terms have been appropriated by consumer culture. The ultimate luxury in our ever more automated and digital world is the artisanal, is the curated, is the crafted. And one thing that is, I think, important to many of the artists I've shown at this point is that there's some thoughtful consideration being given to what we mean when we call something craft, what we mean when we call something artisanal, whose hands count, what we mean by, mass produced, whose hands are making the work that comes out of manufactured projects made in workshops on the other side of the world. And lastly, I just want to throw in something I came across just a couple of days ago, which puts another twist on this whole question of artisanal and handmade. This is an article about a collective called DIS, that has produced a magazine and a recent exhibition called Disown at Red Bull Studio in Los Angeles. And the aesthetic is very, very high tech, very smooth. And there's an article written by Christopher Glazek in Artform, in which he says that while traditional artists struggle to assert, often misleadingly, that their work springs from their own hands and brains, this is the quote, "The artists in Disown were more likely to pretend that they had used a fabricator when in fact they had done everything themselves." I mean, this is what happens with so-called, automated work. There's always someone who's back there working the automated process. And then Glazek goes on to say, "This is refreshing at a time when craftsmanship has been conceptually co-opted by the food industry. It may not be clear to anyone exactly what art is supposed to be, but it's reasonably clear that it's different from an heirloom tomato or a heritage turkey." So I'm going to say that I am not actually convinced that the purveyors of heirloom tomatoes or artisanal beer have vanquished the presence or the value, visual, ethical, conceptual, of handmade art. but it is definitely an interesting time to be in this part of the art world. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn this back over to you, Eleanor. Thank
Okay,
you.
very good. And I'm going to, so yeah, I mean, I think, let's see here now, do we have, okay, good. Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we discovered what happened with the book is that each of us, picked an area that was something that was very interesting or important to us, and that we also felt was very important to the evolution, not only of kind of early feminist art, but is incredibly important, continues to be, and kind of reverberates through the art world today. And one of the things that we found is, even though we had these four very distinct areas that we were working on, is that there kept being all these interesting kind of overlaps. And, so there were certain things that kept coming up, things like, kind of hybridity and sort of the importance of the body and yeah, this collectivity. And, again, we didn't want to have kind of confine ourselves to a very narrow definition of either art or feminism, but we found that it was sort of in the spaces in which all of these ideas interacted that, you would find, in fact, what we were trying to get at in terms of what feminist art and art today is about. Now, my section is about ecofeminism, and this is the title that I gave my chapter, Challenging Dominionism. And I was interested in here. Let me show you. Here's my mother. We all talked about our mothers. This was our mother. My mother is Meryl Euclides. And what I was interested in is kind of the idea of feminism as a way of exploring issues of kind of interconnection, connectivity, not just between people, but, between, in this case, the environment, and in fact, this notion of, I think, connectivity and interconnection is something that we discovered in different ways.
Lost the audio from you again, sorry.
Oh, okay. Is something that we discovered in each of our themes kind of being articulated in a different way. So in this one, in my chapter, I was talking about in challenging dominionism, looking at the idea of how feminist, because it's interesting to me that feminism and the sort of the feminist movement and the environmental movement were kind of born in the United States around the same time in the 70s, and they really shared a lot of ideas and ways of looking at the world. And one of the things that they shared was this idea of challenging dominionism, by which I'm kind of referring to the way in which an idea that sort of it goes back to Genesis, but is sort of baked into Western culture. And dominionism, kind of in a way, its origin is this passage in Genesis, which says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." And what this became was a kind of recipe for the idea of mastery over nature, and then following from that, sort of mastery over the female sex. And you can find, if you go back to particularly to the scientific revolution, which is really kind of where modernity starts, that this notion of extracting from the earth, it is often written about in a language that's very similar to the language of rape and of violence to women. And it became a kind of way of thinking of both of these in a way. And so the revolution against them, interestingly, although it maybe started from different directions, it moved in tandem in the 70s and in a very interesting way. And of course, we haven't we're not done with dominionism. I mean, I think just a kind of recent reiteration of the whole thing is this drill, baby, drill, which I think Trump has told us that that's what he's going to do when he's a dictator on his first day, is he's going to just start drilling. And this notion of the earth is just something that you exploit, basically. Now, ecofeminism is an alternative way of thinking about our relationship with nature. And it's basically talking about an awareness of nature as a system and of the fact that we have a place in nature, but not over it. And implicit in that are a number of assumptions. A lot of the kind of works that I'm going to show and a lot of works that are done under this rubric contain a critique of capitalism, seeing capitalism as being based on the individualism, on the extraction, on survival of the fittest. And these ideas that have been so very harmful to society and to nature itself. I mean, we see, that as climate change begins to, loom as a possible end of the world, we see what the implications of all that are. Another thing that is sort of part of the ecofeminist vision is the notion that, we try to restore nature, but we do it through natural processes, that nature actually is sort of an amazing kind of organism. It can repair itself given the opportunity. And in fact, there's interesting kind of support for this idea from science, from what has been called the Gaia theory, that has been much discussed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margolis, who were chemists and microbiologists respectively. And they were interested in, they started from the idea that an individual cell, its survival depends on its surrounding environment. So it's not the individual, it's not kind of Darwin's sort of survival of the fittest, the individual that is able to, beat out all of the less fit individuals. But in fact, they have to work together. It's this notion of a kind of, as I was saying, kind of interconnection, the idea that life is possible because in a way the earth is in a way a living thing, and life creates the conditions for its own existence. So part of the ecofeminist vision is also this idea of how do we bring those forces back into play that we have sort of distorted and we have kept away. And there's also a kind of notion of hybridity, the idea of kind of breaking down boundaries. And here is, I think the idea of breaking down boundaries occurs in all four of our chapters. But in the terms of ecofeminism, one of the things that has manifested itself is this idea of interspeciesism, that human and non-human and even non-living entities are all interdependent on each other. Okay, so that's, kind of the ecofeminist vision in a nutshell. When in trying to kind of trace it, sort of go back and then trace it forward, I decided to start with Meryl Euclid, because she, to me, is an artist who really epitomizes this idea of interconnection, of the idea of really an organic connection between all of us and all that surrounds us. This is a photograph of an early performance piece of hers in which she's washing the steps of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. And this comes out of this kind of brilliant insight that she had when she was a young artist. And she realized that, she was spending so much time as a young mother and a wife that she didn't seem to have enough time for her art until then she decided, then that is my art. And her kind of immortal statement is, after the revolution, who's going to pick up the garbage on Monday morning? And she talked about the fact that this is what she, as an artist, that was what she was thinking about. So it began as a kind of way of thinking about, kind of maintenance, maybe on the most personal, domestic, familial level. And then it sort of moved outwards. I have another image here. And so that she was talking about it in terms of landscape, in terms of nature, and even on a planetary level. So here, one of her long-term projects has been the transformation of the landfill at Fresh Kills in Staten Island into a park, and the way, again, this sort of notion of nature restoring nature, and also that sort of you can't bring it back to sort of its original condition, but you can find a way for us to work together and to create conditions that are good for human and non-human flourishing. Another mother, I mean, we have, more than one mother. So another mother here, an important one, was Agnes Dennis. And her work is really very much about the contrast between communal and capitalist values. And here, this was again, and it's so interesting to me that as I got into the talking about ecofeminism, realizing how many of the artists who were, particularly the progenitors, started in performance. And we found that there was just, our performance became a kind of through line for all of our themes in a way. At any rate, this is a work that she did in 1982, and this is on the site that was soon to become Battery Park City, but was at this time a landfill. All of the dirt that had come from the building of the World Trade Towers had been created this piece of land, and it was going to be more high rises, but for a kind of idyllic summer, she planted a wheat field there. And so there's these kind of wonderful photographs of, and there's photographs of her harvesting the wheat, and it's of course very symbolic. It's not that, it's going to feed the world, but the contrast really, I think, between two sets of values is so clear in an image like this and in a performance like this, the kind of accumulative value of capitalism behind you, real estate values, and then this much more humanistic value, of life-giving forces. And to me, that's very much about kind of the philosophy of ecofeminism. All right, now, why is this not giving me? Now, in a more recent piece, she has continued this kind of work, and a more recent piece here is something that she did. She started to do these very large scale projects. And this one, Tree Mountain, as the title you can see tells you, was a kind of monumental creation, using this pyramid. She's used the pyramid form in a lot of her work, but planting trees, bringing together people, planting trees, and her hopes that it will last for 400 years. And she talks about how, even if we end up destroying the earth, and everything is gone, some later, group will come and they will see this peculiar formation and realize that people work together to create this. So this is very much about a kind of communal sensibility, and how do we, create a place that is open for all. And of course, the idea too is that these little saplings will grow and grow, and it will become a park, and it will feed the atmosphere, and it will have all of these kind of wonderful effects. Another kind of set of mothers, although you see here, we have also a man, and men can be our mothers too in this particular case. This is Helen and Newton Harrison, who to me are also sort of just very, very generative, important figures in this notion of ecofeminism. And what they became known for, they worked together as a team for many decades, actually, and just recently both have died. But what they were interested in was to create environmental blueprints for system-wide approaches to ecological problems. So part of their thing was, that one of the reasons we're having so much trouble, all these ecological issues, is because we don't think big enough. We don't think systemically enough. So this is a piece, for example, and what they would do also, that their art, people were always asking, but is it really art? And that's a question that comes up particularly a lot in terms of ecofeminism, as I think sometimes, in craft as well, this question, is it art? What their art really consisted of was working with specialists from different fields and people on the ground in dealing with particular environmental situations, places where there were watersheds were compromised, pollution was destroying forests, etc. and thinking about ways that you might be able to fix that. And so talking to these people, and then you see that there's this text here, and the texts were really kind of these conversations that they had with all of these different people. And so, for example, in this one, Peninsula Europe, it also then kind of making an image that, you know, a kind of metaphor that could stick in people's heads that would help to also explain this sort of larger idea of how do you restore. And so here the notion of Peninsula Europe is the idea that we have to get rid of national borders, that there are, you know, it's really the national, you know, pollution, you know, doesn't, you know, degradation of the land doesn't stop at a border, but instead, you know, it flows through the land. And so you have to have this sort of larger system-wide way of thinking about it. So again, you know, this idea of collaboration, cooperation is very crucial to their work. And they, I think, were and had been incredibly important in terms of creating a model for a certain kind of ecological art that's very widespread now. Then there's Betsy Damon. Betsy Damon, also starting with performance here. This is a performance she did in 1977. The 7,000-year-old woman was a reference to the idea of a kind of pre-patriarchal matriarchy here, the 7,000 years ago, and sort of going back again to sort of these sort of progenitors. And it was a performance in which she covered herself with these bags of flowers, and then she gave them to people, she broke them, she you know, kind of bestowed them on the world. And it was meant to be a kind of healing, a healing ritual. From this, she, like Meryl Euclides, who also started in performance, she moved into doing large-scale environmental projects. And her particular interest has been the idea of water, and she talks about living water, the idea that living water is water that derives from natural sources and that flows through streams fashioned by nature. So it's not kind of dammed, it's not, you know, made into channels, but that if you let water do what it's supposed to do, and the idea of using water and these natural systems as a cleansing way, a way to sort of cleanse. And so this was one of her sort of biggest projects, and one that for her generated a lot of other projects in Chengdu, China, which was also very collaborative. She worked with a whole group of local people and created this water park, which is and in the middle of the city here. It is this natural wetland that acts as a water cleaning system for this very polluted water. And there's also an educational center, there's an amphitheater, there's interactive water sculptures. So again, it's a way of it's educational, and yet it's bringing together kind of all of these ideas about collaboration, about, you know, interconnection, and the earth as a living thing. And again, sort of for some people raising that question, but is it art? Which, you know, I think what we began, or at least what I began to feel, is sort of less and less interesting question in a way. Now, these mothers, these older artists, have had a tremendous effect and impact on younger artists who are also working in this area of environmental art. And one of the foremost ones is Mary Mattingly. And as I mentioned, one of the kind of tenes in a way of the ecofeminism movement is a real skepticism and critique of capitalism. This, again, is a performance piece, and in which Mary Mattingly took all of her possessions, put them in a big ball, and she pulled them across the Bayonne Bridge. And so in a way, it was instructive for herself, but also, you know, for viewers to sort of think about our consumption. You know, how much do we really need to live with? What is our consumption doing to the larger environment and to each other? She's also, what she's really, I think, spent most of her time on is creating different models of self-sustaining environments, mostly in New York City. She lives in New York City, in the New York City area. So she'll find these, they're temporary, but she'll find these spaces, these places, and in some cases working, you know, at the edge of the water, or in this case, actually on a barge. And, it's got, it's solar heated, it's got organic gardening. And what's particularly interesting about this one is that it's sort of also flying in the face of certain city regulations, because there are these sort of regulations about you're on public lands, you're not supposed to forage or grow food. But by putting it on a barge like this, it's not on the mainland, it's on a barge. And so therefore it's allowable. And then she opens it up to the public, and people can come, and they, there's vegetable gardens, people can come and take the vegetables, and and they can work in the gardens. And so again, it becomes a real sort of communal activity. Aviva Romani has also kind of thought about what are some of the laws that we have that are, in a way, standing in the way of a more a better relationship to our environment. And in this case, I think this is a kind of brilliant piece that she's been working on now for actually a number of years, in which she's putting two apparently opposing legal principles, she's juxtaposing them to see if there is some way in which you can use one of them to sort of vanquish the other. And in this case, the principles are, on the one hand, eminent domain, in that this is particularly in the creation of the building of pipelines, that, when the government deems that a pipeline is necessary, that you have to go through you can basically take over someone's land. But by turning someone's land into an artwork, in this case, this symphony here, and she's painted these signs throughout the trees, and it's actually a symphony that you could play. By turning it into a work of art, she then invokes the artist's rights principle, which says that an owner of an artwork cannot mutilate or change it. And so therefore eminent domain is trumped by the artist's rights. In a kind of similar way, Amy Balkin is exploiting a quirk in our economic system. She's talking about the absurdity of carbon trade-offs. This is sort of the idea that if you buy a carbon trade-off, you can pollute in one area if you don't pollute in another area. There's this idea, and so her idea is that this is kind of absurd, because it's not really going to clean anything up. So she's created these, what she calls them sort of these parks, really, these a public park. This is just it's not an actual, it's a illustration. It's not the actual thing. But what she has done is she has had people buy back these carbon trade-off rights, and put them, instead of using them and selling them off and using them to offset some more polluting thing elsewhere, to sort of put them in a bank, in a way. And therefore it becomes a way of creating a cleaner environment, a cleaner atmosphere. And let's see, just a couple more here. Jan Munn, who is, again, this notion of sort of nature, cleaning nature. Here, this is a project that she did in a Superfund site at Newton Creek and the Gowanus Canal, which is incredibly polluted, was contaminated by an oil spill in 1950, and it just kept polluting until 1978. The groundwater was very polluted. And she's exploiting the fact that there is a variety of oyster mushrooms which actually can clean and remove these toxins from the water. And so this is a creation you see here, these fairy rings. And again, it's a kind of interesting experimental model for a way of using science. It also raises that, is it art? But why not? It is also, in a way, it's a creation, a transformation of materials in the same way that art is. And then finally, actually one of my favorites, Natalie Jeremijenko, who she's very involved with the idea of interspecies communication and the rights of non-humans. And this is a work of hers called Mussel Choir. And it turns on the fact that mussels can filter water at a prodigious rate. And so she has taken these mussels, putting them on the edge of the water. She did one of these, on, I think, the Hudson River. And they're outfitted with sensors to detect the opening and closing of their shells, because when they open and close their shells a lot, then it means that the water is very polluted. And then this has been connected to a sound machine so that in a sense, they actually sing and they tell us how bad, what is the condition of the water. So again, kind of the sort of interspecies, we realize that our debt to them and what they can do to help us. And we should think more about what we can do to help them. So that's, the sort of the ecofeminism, the sort of, I guess, the large lesson of ecofeminism is the idea that, we're all in this together and we have to share. And again, I think that's a concept that kind of runs through all of the sections in our book. Now, what I want to do now is to bring in a surprise guest. One of our other collaborators, Sue Scott, is here. And Sue, where are you? Can you unmute and come forward?
Yes, here I am.
Yay, Sue. All right. So Sue is the she created the chapter on abstraction. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And I can tell your mother if you want.
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me crash in on this. And I love listening to what you both had to say. I'm just continually be impressed with my fellow collaborators and so happy to be working with you. And I think one thing was great about this book is that after 2 books, it really allowed us each to do something we were very much interested in even no matter how sort of I don't want to say, but well, in my case, maybe how bizarre it was in a way, and that each one of us went along with the idea, and as we worked it out. When we did our first book, we included Judy Pfaff in it, and then we had a little show out at Dorsky Gallery on Long Island City that included the 12 artists that were in this, and Judy was there installing a piece. And she said, I just don't understand this. I mean, I'm a feminist and I've never been included in a feminist show because I do abstract art. And that was in 2008, you guys, 2009. And I've never really forgot about that comment to me. And I'm also somebody who really loves abstraction, abstract painting. And it has not always, but it has sort of been put aside in terms of conversations of feminism because of lack in a sense of content. So I wanted to write a chapter on that, like what is abstraction and feminism and how do you discuss it? And I got partially into it and I was like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? Because I don't have a completely through line in it. It sort of pivots as I go along. But I would say my main idea is that innovation is its own form of feminism. It's not particularly about content. It's about the fact that these women, I mean, we say we started in the 70s, but I just had to start with Hilma af Klint. I mean, when that show just completely blew me away because I wasn't in New York when she had her show, I think at PS1. And I couldn't believe, first of all, how fantastic the work was, how her vision was that it would be shown in this temple, this like a ziggurat temple, and she ends up actually being at the Guggenheim. And the notion that, I mean, I'm sort of all over the place here, but going back to Eleanor, what you were saying about the performative aspect of things, the fact that she readily admitted that her inspiration or her guide, her guidance for making this work came from someplace outside herself. So I started with her, and then brought it up, quickly up to the present. And I don't know, can you put Pat on?
Yeah. Hang on. Let's see here. I think she should be okay.
So I include though I start with Hilma af Klint. I really start because of the 70s with Pat Steer, and the thing that is also a through line from my work is the channeling of the spiritual aspect of things, or nature, and the way to connect with nature. And I've always been a little bit obsessed with Pat. And here you see the performative aspect of what she's doing, but also the fact that she's channeling nature in a way. I mean, she's creating waterfalls, but she's doing it through paint that falls. So it's this connection between the actual material that she's using. And this is Nancy. I mean, Nancy and I actually in craft and abstraction had much more overlaps than the other that I had with the other two people. So she's my mother, and she sort of, to me, wraps it all up. And just one last thing I want to say is that as we were writing this, I mean, a lot of this evolves as we talk to each other and see where everybody's research and interest is taking them. Is that the 4 subjects that we chose, 2 of them, ecofeminism and performance, which Helaine wrote about, who's not here. These are things that women artists created themselves. These were things that wouldn't have happened without women artists doing the work. As Nancy pointed out, when the craft, women were sort of squeezed into a certain corner, a certain section of it, and yet they made that blossom. In abstraction and in painting, women were entering the domain of men, and I also, which made it hugely difficult on many levels. So I also discuss in terms of how the innovations that these women did, talk about Anne Truitt, Helen Frankenthaler, were also sort of pushed back or negated over time. And now we're really, really looking back on these things, and even Hilma af Klint, and reevaluating them.
Yeah.
Eleanor, I'd like to suggest at this point that we allow people to make comments or ask questions. It would be a good thing to do next. If
Sure. Sure. That's great.
And I think they could just unmute themselves if they want to, share a thought or ask a question. I'm sure there's.
Yeah, I'd like to share a thought. I'm these days located down in St. Petersburg, Florida, and there's a fantastic Judy Pfaff show that's up at the Sarasota Art Museum that opened last month and runs for a while. So if anybody's down here, but one of the interesting comments Sue made was that, she's talking about being abstract, and of course I've followed her work for years. She has this incredible installation that is a reaction to the destruction of the last hurricane down here, and it affected the south over in the Fort Myers Captiva Island area, which is south of Sarasota. So Sarasota and St. Pete and Tampa got spared by this, but I have pictures of this installation. It's just incredible. And she's got like a boat and all these big like tree things, and she takes up a huge room with all these objects to try and make a piece that's mimicking the incredible destruction of this hurricane. And in that time, I'm looking at that, I'm not thinking of that particularly as abstract. I mean, because she's giving us literal objects, and even in some of her abstract works, she's using literal objects. So it's kind of interesting to just think about her in a different context. So I just wanted to put that out there as someone who also works on these kind of things. And
let's see if we can squeeze in a couple of more people. It would be nice, if you don't mind. And if not, I'll throw a question in myself to the panelists. Does feminist art represent its own academy?
I think go ahead, Nancy.
It just demonstrates the diversity of, I mean, we talked a lot about what constitutes feminism, and then in the end, I think with each book, we decided not to define it, and not to lean too hard into the question of whether an artist has to identify herself as a feminist. We talked a lot about the fluidity of all the definitions. I mean, that became sort of the beginning of every conversation was, let's not get stuck in hard and fast boundaries here, because what we're really thinking about is how interconnected everything is. And, it was part of the reason we included men. So, I think, I mean, yeah, your question suggests maybe you think there is a feminist academy. So I'm curious about that.
Oh, I think it's definitely a possibility.
Mhm.
I think a lot of feminist art that I've seen, or that we've shown at Artist Talk on Art from the very beginning, has been performative. A lot of it has been performative, or those artists have at least begun in a performative way, and then moved on to other things later in their careers. Agnes Dennis is an example of that.
Right. Well, I think that, again, we didn't want to get sort of bogged down in, I don't know, cliches, stereotypes, etc. But, there is, performance is connected to the body. And of course, women art has often been connected to the body, the importance of the body, and nature, and the identification, certainly with ecofeminism, the identification of nature and the body and women and all of this sort of thing. So I think that it's again, we didn't want to sort of break it down to some sort of essentialist thing. We try to avoid that idea that, it's just, women are nature, men are not nature, whatever. But I think that the idea that so many of the artists that we deal with, have worked in performance has to do with that, kind of connection to the body. Nancy talked a lot about sort of handmade and the touch. And, again, if we're sort of thinking, what is feminism? Part of it seems to be about a kind of knowledge through the body, maybe. That seems to be one of the things that, if we were to define, or well, we don't want to define, but if we were to say what it is that we're trying to get at here, in a way, I think, each of the books is sort of struggling to define this thing kind of in different ways and using kind of different prisms. But, that's one of the things that we discover as we go through the books is certain, that there are these certain themes and things, and one of them being performance, that just, emerge, and that we didn't necessarily expect that to be the case.
Okay.
Do you think that the woman as the one being able to give birth, this is the typical traditional thought, and that because they're able to produce something, that they feel more of a connection to the earth and to human beings because they're able to do the actual birthing? Is that any kind of factor with women and ecofeminism and their connection to the earth as producing something that's living from cells?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, I don't want to get, because I get, leery of, kind of that sort of, Barbara Kruger, we won't play nature to your culture kind of thing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, yes, I mean, there is something. Well, I've been doing research recently on the whole notion of the goddess, and again, going back to the 70s, and there was this whole kind of group of artists who were very interested in the goddess, but not sort of not just a reverse of the male god, but their idea was that there were perhaps had been, and there actually now is anthropology that suggests this. In fact, it may be the case. These matriarchal societies that predated the kind of, more violent, patriarchal, societies that then kind of took over. And that, within that, that there was a kind of this model of being kind of, connected to the earth, connected to each other. Again, this idea of kind of interconnection and interdependence, which was very much a part of those cultures, and a kind of non-hierarchical way of organizing society, all of these kinds of things. So Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a fine line. We don't want to just sort of fall into those kinds of stereotypes. On the other hand, these kinds of ideas seem to be very generative for artists. And like with the goddess idea, whether or not it's true about the matriarchal cultures, it really helped, I think, a lot of artists sort of focus and think about, in a way, alternatives to, kind of some of the worst excesses of patriarchal culture. So even if it's just a metaphor, it turns out to be a kind of very useful one.
Is there anyone else that would like to ask a question or make a comment?
I don't know if I have a question. It's Roz here. Thank you for this so much. I think at this time, especially as rights over our bodies are being taken away, that the whole notion of feminism, I'm reading that some young people, they don't seem to care about it, but I guess I'm sounding like my mother now. Well, they don't understand, but but having marched all my life for women's rights and never been really much of a groupie of like, I'm a feminist artist. I mean, I feel it more powerfully than ever, that the force of women in the world. And I'm so glad you talk about men, because we're made of X and Y, and it brings in the whole science, spiritual thing that needs to be further examined. I mean, women have stretched into the male world and we have really made strides, but I think what's happened is we've decided we don't want to be men,
Right.
And men are going to have to stretch too. So,
and some have, and
I don't
some
have a
do.
question,
Yeah.
but what was that?
And then some men do and have.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. But thank you so much. This was a really wonderful presentation. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Do you find that there are so many more women in ECHO, in ecology, in environmental work? Because I feel like it. I don't know if that's real or not, working on environmental art.
Well, that's an interesting question. And what I did find, it did seem to me that the origins, again, going back to the mothers, it was very female oriented in the beginning, especially. I feel like it's such a vast field now. I mean, that's a field that has just, it is so, it's just widened and exploded and rippled out. And so I would be hesitant to say that now, because I think there are, lots of men who are male artists who are also kind of very involved in all of this. But it's certainly in the origins, looking back to the origins, it really did feel like it was a real female thing.
Yeah.
On that note of it being a real female thing, I would like to thank Eleanor Heartney, Nancy Princenthal, and Sue Scott also, and our audience. And I would like to thank our programming director, Miriam Deutsch, and her crew, especially Brianna Rodriguez in New York and Susanna Couch in Paris, and our programming committee, and our board, and many volunteers. Next week on the 18th, artists as curators. And when we resume after the holiday on January 8th, we'll have Mark Kostabi being interviewed by Walter Robinson.
Wow.
How's that for something completely different? Huh? Okay, don't miss that one. In any event, I thank you all, and I wish you all a very nice holiday if we don't see each other until the new year. Thank you all for coming tonight.
And thank you for inviting us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great to hear this. I so enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.